Anna is a teacher born in New Zealand, but currently based in Dubai. She is one of the Macmillan authors and is has experience of teaching young learners, but also adults, and she's also a teacher trainer on the Cambridge accredited courses. She says she's addicted to learning, which is wonderful to hear, and absolutely passionate about enabling teachers to enhance effective learning for all learners. Could I get Anna to turn on her microphone and her video? And I'll keep talking about Anna and all the wonderful things she's done. If you have a subscription to English Teaching Professional or Modern English Teacher, you will be familiar with Anna's writing, because she writes regularly for these teaching journals. She also presents internationally. So if you go to teacher training conferences like TEFL conferences, you might have bumped into Anna in a session, or you might have attended one of her talks. And here we have Anna, who is passionate about teacher development, educational psychology, and enhancing effective learning. So Anna, take it away and tell us all about extensive reading and intensive reading skills.
Fabulous. Thank you, Chia. I just wanted to check, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Perfect.
Excellent. Great. So thank you so much for your introduction. And Macmillan, thank you so much for organizing again such a wonderful event with, indeed, like Chia said before, an amazing lineup of speakers. So thank you all for joining. I think we've got about 745 people joining so far. It's fabulous that you're taking this opportunity as well to join Macmillan and to actually learn new things and share information. So I'm very happy to be part of this again this year. And I'm going to say it's going to be an interactive session today. So I really hope you know how to use the chat box, but I think you can, because I've seen lots of different places passing by. I see some messages from me as well. Also, let us know in that chat box if there are any issues with sound, that you can let us know what the problem is, or if there is a problem, because we need to know, because it is the internet, it is Dubai, and we never know. So good. So let's get started then today, because we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics. We're going to talk about reading. And I don't know what you are like, but even as a small kid, I just loved reading anything I could put my hands on. I was always lost in the house, sitting behind the cupboards, or even in the garden, sitting somewhere under a tree behind a bush, trying to read something. And as far as I remember, I absolutely loved reading. So my question for you is as well, assuming, and I think most teachers I've met so far in my life seem to like reading as well. When you read, how does reading make you feel? Can you give me one adjective to put in the chat box? How does reading make you feel? What sort of adjectives do you associate with reading? Lovely, excited, relaxed, enjoyment. Oh my God, this is going so fast. Pleasure. I love all these words. Absorbed, inspired, curious, excitement, motivated. Lovely. And I think for a lot of us, actually, when we speak about reading, that is really what we feel. For me, the adjective would be immersed. When I read, I'm not really here. I forget about everything I'm doing. I forget to cook for my husband or whatever else I was supposed to do. I feel like I'm absolutely underwater in my own little world. And the bubble has to burst before I come out again. So I love this quote from Stephen King, that books are uniquely portable magic. You can open them anywhere, even better so on e-readers and phones nowadays. And it's really amazing how it can change your mood and your feeling on the spot. However, our students might not always agree with us. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about reading, why it's so important, different ways of reading that you can do in your classrooms and outside the classroom, but also the challenges that we might face when we talk about reading and encouraging our students to read. So how can we go about and make them read more for pleasure inside and outside the classroom? So a little overview of today, what we're going to go through. I think the first thing we need to do, and that is really important, is that we establish together what reading is. So we're all on the same page when we talk about reading, pun intended. So please, can you use your chat box and complete the following sentence for me? No wrong, no right answer, but reading is. How would you complete that sentence? What is reading for you? Discovering, absorbing, knowledge, liberating, understanding, lots of amazing ideas, getting some information, communicating. Great. And I think there are lots of different ways to finish this sentence indeed. I love that reflection of your inner world or a bridge to the outer world. In the end, I think reading is all about understanding and making meaning of the scribbles that you have in front of you on paper. It's a really special experience, Winnie, indeed. And reading is really all about making meaning, even though when you teach, for example, young learners, you're very much working on that letter sound correlation, phonics, building vocabulary, reading with fluency. So that all in the end is a means to an end to enable them to understand what they read on paper. Yeah. So it could be a book, it could be a magazine, it could be anything, but we're always working on understanding what's in front of us. Although when I talk about reading, I'm not always sure that my students have that same impression. They might have answered reading is boring if I would have given them this sentence. Good. And I think it's very important that we do talk about reading and we do get our students to read, because there's many different reasons, but I'm not going to give them to you. And I'm pretty sure I don't need to convince you as a teacher or a parent why reading is so important. But for my students, at times I really ask them, why do you think that we're spending so much time on reading? Because it's really the center of the curriculum. It's a really important skill you need to develop. But why do they need to develop it? So what would be your answer if your students say, teacher, what's all the fuss about? Why is reading so important for me? Use your chat box again if you want to. Indeed, Ali Reza, to improve that comprehension, to enhance your way of thinking. It is also a way to develop critical thinking, right? To get that information, to learn about culture, to broaden your horizons, to gain knowledge, to acquire vocabulary. And when I talk about reading, I'm not really talking about reading in a second language only. It's also very important in your first language, because indeed, in a way, it exercises your mind, because reading is not something your brain naturally does. Your brain is made to speak and to listen, not to read and to write. So we have to practice that skill. It's actually, if you ask me, reading is a life skill. Yeah, we're giving students the opportunity to gain knowledge, to become fluent in taking in that knowledge in their first, their second, or their third language. But also it enables them, when they are good readers in English, to actually do their future studies in English, gain information from the internet, and actually communicate much better in that second language. So on the screen, you can see the linguistic advantages of reading. And I think a really important one is that it builds overall language proficiency. I don't know if you've experienced it when you read, you see the vocabulary in context, you see the grammar being used, and you sort of develop that belly feeling for your new language. Another one that's really important is that reading helps you to become a better writer. You read the ideas, you can see how language is used to express ideas, and to become a good writer. You don't only need to practice your writing, you've also got to practice your reading, because it's really useful to see good models for writing. And as you all know, it's nearly in all exams. So we need to be able to do this well. Linguistically, we need to have these skills available. But also reading doesn't only develop your linguistic abilities, it also develops your social emotional abilities, your cognitive abilities. It helps you to learn, indeed, about other topics in life, other subjects. Again, it's a life skill. You can better understand people if you know about life in their countries. Culture, somebody mentioned before. Yeah. It also, particularly, I think, in our day and age, it's really a good tool to help your students improve their focus and concentration. I mean, the internet is a fabulous tool, but because of that, our brain is sort of used to shift between things very quickly. When you read, you really have to pay attention. You have to attend, and it's active, conscious reading that really develops those concentration skills. So you might not be able to do that so long initially, but the more you practice, the more you can do that. Yeah? And also, if you look at neuroscience and social studies, it has really made us more empathetic, because you read stories about people in different countries, you really literally step into their shoes and have a look at the world through their eyes, and it helps you to build that empathy. The last reason why reading is so important is that it's relaxing, it's enjoyable. And again, research at Sussex University, for example, says if you read 6 minutes a day, only 6 minutes a day for pleasure, your stress levels drop with about 68%. So it's a really, really useful thing to do in life. So I sometimes wonder, so many benefits, why do my students not like it so much? Yeah. I'm going to hand over to you, because I love to find out what sort of reading you do with your learners in and outside the classroom. What kind of reading activities do you get them to do? Can you use the chat box for your ideas? Silent reading, stories, reading aloud, retelling stories, games, choral reading. They read at home. Well, I don't know if that's unfortunate, because as long as they read, we are actually developing those reading abilities. Creative writing as a follow-up, a readathon. Harja, that sounds really interesting. A quick reads, reading and answering questions. Lovely. I think what you have just talked about in the chat box is 2 different ways of reading. And I'll show you the pictures, and I think you can probably guess where I'm going to go. Yeah. So at the left side, you see the 2 kids being very focused on what they're doing. They're really looking for detail, intensive reading indeed, Saeed. So you're reading with a certain purpose, and it's often a linguistic purpose. Either we need to develop, or we want our learners to develop, the sub-skills of reading, reading for gist, specific information, detail. So it's really about how to apply these skills accurately. Or maybe we have a linguistic purpose. We want them to read to figure out why that grammar has been used, what the vocabulary means in context. And indeed, Ahmed, the other picture at the right is more focusing on extensive reading. And extensive reading, there is really no other purpose than reading for pleasure, reading for enjoyment, which is something it seems like most of us already like to do. Yeah. So there are 2 different ways of reading, and I don't say one is better than the other, but I do think if you want a balanced diet, that you need to use both in tandem, in or outside your classroom. So before I'm going to go into that a little bit more, you see a few keywords on the screen, and they relate either to intensive reading or extensive reading. So what I'd like you to do is have a think, and maybe take one of those words, easy, and let me know, do you think that relates to intensive reading, or does that relate to extensive reading? Suba, I'm going to answer that question in a minute once we have done this activity, what the difference is between intensive and extensive reading. Because it seems like a lot of people know a lot about it. So I like to activate your prior knowledge as we do in the classroom, and then I'm going to explain. Fabulous. So Maria, extensive reading. Which words do you associate with extensive reading? And Marcy, I don't know. If you can only hear my voice or cannot see me, I'm handing that over to our team because I cannot change anything from here. Intensive reading, more challenging. Lovely. The main idea is your extensive reading. Great. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds and then we talk through them together. And hopefully you get a clearer understanding of the difference if you're not sure yet. And it's nice to see that some of you are saying, I like both. Good. Right. So both of them, Maddie, indeed, are very important. I'm just going to click on the ones that are related to extensive reading. So the ones that haven't got a tick, they are the ones that relate to intensive reading, because I thought that might be easy to check our answers that way. And once we've ticked them all, we talk about it a little bit more. I say that I'm the same. I think a lot of us, anything I can read, even labels in the supermarket, and that is still very useful information. Yeah? So what you see here, when we speak about extensive reading, our aim really is for our students to read focused on meaning making. So it's all about the comprehension of what they read. We're not focusing on underlining all the adjectives. We're not asking why are we using the present perfect in this context. It's all about understanding what you are reading. And that is really important for enjoyment. That's why what our students read, when they read extensively, needs to be less challenging than what they read intensively. So we want it to be fairly easy. So they don't have to stop after every word, go and look in the dictionary and think, oh, what was it about? By the time they have figured out the words, they might have forgotten what the start of the sentence is. We don't want them. So it has to be relatively easy what they read. That also enables my students to read much faster and develop that skill of reading fluently. Because extensive reading, the aim is for our students to upper their reading miles, to develop their reading power. Because remember, when you learn how to read, there's so much going on. It's a very complex process for your brain, and it's not an innate process. Yeah, reading is a man-made skill that we therefore need to teach explicitly to first or second language speakers, exactly the same. Your brain sees the letter, there's a sound attached to that letter. You put the sounds together, you've got the word, then you need to know the meaning of the words. And in a sentence, you've got to put those words together, and then is the I know what they're saying. So it's cognitively very demanding in your brain. So an easy level of text, make sure that they can read fast, more fluently, and it's easy to make meaning. It's also more enjoyable. And quite often when we talk about extensive reading, we want our students to read large amounts. Now, large amounts of reading could be a whole book, it could be a graded reader, but when you start reading, a whole page could already be a large amount. Yeah, so I can't say there is so many words. It depends on the level, it depends on the age group, but the ultimate aim of extensive reading is enjoyment. So whereas you look at intensive reading, this is most often done in the classroom, where the teacher will choose what we are going to read, or the course book sort of prescribes what you're going to do the next day. We're looking at often shorter texts, We read at a higher level. The content is maybe more difficult. We need to pre-teach those words. We read a bit slower. And the aim really is to teach you those reading sub-skills, how to apply reading for gists. I mean, it might sound very simple, but reading for a general idea is not as simple for some students because they have the habit to read every word. Yeah, so here we're really looking at accuracy. I'm going to give you an example to illustrate how this works. Irene, what's more appropriate in an elementary class? I think if you read loud, you get the students to read aloud. You're not always developing comprehension. You may be more working on pronunciation or the speed of the reading. So if you want them to develop meaning making, then it's more natural to read silently. Yeah, so they're both okay. It depends on your aim as a teacher. Yeah, good. So here you see a lovely example. I've taken this from Gateway, 2nd edition. I think Dave Spencer is writing the 3rd edition as we speak, which should be coming out pretty soon, which is very exciting. This is just a reading page from his course book, but I'm pretty sure you recognize this in any course book. Elena, isn't it a fantastic book? I love it too. Yeah. Good. So what you see here, the first activity is often talk to your partner about the topic. So you're really activating prior knowledge. There's a pre-reading task. So you get their brain ready for the topic. Then the next activity in the book could either be a simple reading, maybe specific information first, maybe detail afterwards. You're really getting students to practice. How do we read certain information? Do you move your eyes quickly? Do you attend to every word? And it's about finding the correct answer. So it's all about accuracy here. And then the last activity in your intensive reading lesson is often a post-reading activity. That could be something that focuses on vocabulary development, pull out some words of the text, find a synonym. It could also be a speaking activity or a writing activity where you are going to respond to the text that you have read in a personal matter. Yeah? I'm pretty sure you're familiar with this. So this would be intensive reading. The teacher chooses the text and the student is doing all the activities on a short, often a little bit more complex text because we want you to develop your vocabulary and your reading skills. However, the other side or the other way of reading we should try to encourage in our classroom is that extensive reading. And often we use graded readers for extensive reading. Now, here is an overview from the graded readers that Macmillan has. MacmillanReaders.com is a website where you can download this beautiful booklet about how to use readers in your classroom. And the main aim here is not so much to develop that linguistic abilities, it's to read without the pleasure so you can enjoy what you read. And this is why it's so important that it's at the right level, students' own level, because I have never taught a class where all my students in intermediate are at exactly the same reading level. So we have to find where my students are. And Elena, I see what you mean. I think a lot of students maybe are not used to reading for pleasure. They just don't like it, right? Even though we have these amazing books. But good. So the focus here is on making meaning and uninterrupted reading. While it's in Gateway, we read, we peer check, feedback, we read again, peer check, feedback. Here, you just read maybe for 5 minutes, maybe for 10, and if you really like it, maybe for 20 minutes. So this is the distinction between that intensive and extensive reading. Now, as you can see, Gateway, the book itself for the students, has a lot of intensive reading, but the beauty of this series is that it goes with an extensive reader as well that they can download on the e-reader. So, for example, A1 Plus goes with White Fang. I think A2 goes with the Three Musketeers. So each book actually has that option as well to provide your learners with some extensive reading. Because like I said before, you want to read in tandem. It's not enough to only read intensively because you practice linguistic abilities. Well, as extensive reading, you really look at that fluency of reading and getting into a regular reading habit. Yeah, so that's what we need to get our students to. Okay, so very quick, I don't know what you know about extensive reading, because it's very popular in some places, and in other places, interestingly, not so much. So you're not here, I can't see you, so you can't do thumb up or thumb down, but you might be able to read my statements and say 1, true, 2, true, I don't know what you think. So have a look, read my statements about extensive reading, ER, and let me know if you think it's true or false. So we explore the concept a little bit further, and you have to do some reading, intensive reading. I like the up, down. It's going really fast. I'm focusing on my chat box, so that's why I'm not talking to you for a second. Fabulous to see how many of you are actually engaged, because it feels a little bit weird. She and I were just talking about it. Talking to your screen with no students is always a little bit strange. So thank you for being so active. Great. 5 more seconds. A lot of fabulous answers. I like the up and down that you have done as well. It would be great if we had these little symbols in our chat box. Good. Let's have a look through this then. And well done for all of you who said no, extensive reading is not a new concept. It's actually quite an old concept. It was developed in the 1920s. By a gentleman in the US who started looking at reading in the first language classroom, like how to create a reading habit, which is what we're still talking about nowadays. In the 1960s, it got taken to the second language classroom, but it sort of died out, I think, a little bit over time. And in the 1980s, it had a massive revival because we started to notice that good readers kept reading and became better and better, while as the people that didn't read so much were reading less motivation, were reading less and less. So it was like a vicious circle, downwards and upwards. So it became more important again in the 1980s in the second language classroom. Yeah. Interestingly, even though it's very popular and we talk about it a lot, it's not so well used in schools. There might be many reasons for that, and we might talk about that in a minute. Yeah? Indeed, extensive reading leads to that incidental learning. And if you are familiar with Christian, he talks a lot about this as well. It's a fabulous way of reading, of picking up vocabulary and grammar and becoming better at your language. Yes, there is a lot of language you pick up, but it's not enough to only do extensive reading in the classroom. Research has proven again and again that they need a little bit more attention focused on building vocabulary and on the different reading ways. Do you move your eye over each word? Do you read every word carefully? This needs to be taught explicitly. And that's why we have intensive reading. Yeah? But also incidental learning, of course, not only vocabulary or that belly feeling in grammar, it's also about content, different topics that we learn about when we read extensively. Yeah? Good. And then the next one, there is benefits in the first language, in the second language. And the main benefit that we talk about is developing the ability to read fluently. Like I said before, your brain is not made to read. Your brain is made to listen and speak. So you need to develop that movement in the eye, that saccating and fixating we need, that you can move quickly and stop on the most important word. Yeah. So you're actually developing the eye movement, but also your ability in the brain to quickly make meaning. The more you read, the more words you know, the easier it will become to make meaning. I think this is one of the problems with our students. They maybe read things that are too complicated. That means there is no flow in reading. They can't enjoy it because they don't understand it. And that's a huge challenge. Yeah, good. Now, is it always done in the same way? It is not. Originally, when you look at extensive reading, when you write about extensive reading, you can see that it's all about do it outside the classroom, do it outside the classroom, but you don't have to. In my lower level classes, I read every day in the classroom. It can be 10 minutes, 15 minutes after lunch break. It could be the beginning of the day on Thursday morning, or maybe the end of the day. Yeah? Once my students have become more used to reading and have a little bit of concentration, they will take it outside the classroom as well, because indeed, the more you do it, the better you get. So you can do it in different ways. Place, but also what you read, your genre, but also how you read. Some of my students love their phone, others read on an iPad, others read on the computer, a paper book. Some read lying down on the floor, others like to sit behind their desk. So there is lots of variety here. And this is where you need to see what works and makes your students click a little bit as well. Yeah. And the last one, yes, extensive reading will really help your students become more fluent. When you're more fluent, it's easier to read. It becomes less effortful. You can make meaning better. You become more motivated. You read more. So it's actually really an upward spiral. If we provide those opportunities and get them to read, because this is the challenge, then it will really enhance their motivation and a positive attitude towards language learning. So reading on your mobile is slightly different for your brain. If you look at research, some people find it much harder, but I think if you look at the younger generation, they might not know any better. I still love an old-fashioned book that I can open and go back with my eyes to what I read on the previous page. So there is different ways of reading, but the brain of younger children we teach nowadays is wired differently because they have grown up with all this. So for them, it might be more enjoyable because they're more used to this. Yeah? Good. So before I go into how we can get them reading, because that is one of the difficulties, right? Do you use extensive reading in your classroom already? If so, let me know. And it can be in a book, like what I love to do, an old-fashioned paper book, because I'm a dinosaur. But it could also be on their iPads or in the screen. That is fabulous. So many yeses. Sometimes is better than never. Book club setting, Patricia. That sounds lovely. Graded readers. Good. So I can see that you use different sources. It could be something that's authentic, like a magazine. It could be an online article. It could be a part of a blog post. It could be a simplified book, like a graded reader. And sometimes it's more authentic material. That is lovely. Yeah, The Guardian as well. Good. I think a lot of us might already do this with different resources. And like we said, this is absolutely fine, as long as your students are actually triggered to read. Yeah? So here, when we look at this, sometimes we call it sustained silent reading. Sometimes we call it drop everything and read. And you can see Crescent there as well with his free voluntary reading. And I love the USSR, uninterrupted sustained silent reading. And Webb, I've seen come across in schools, we enjoy books. So it doesn't really matter what label you put on it for your students or the parents, as long as they get the opportunity to actually enjoy, and we need to get them to enjoy it. So there is a few things that we need to do. Main reason, next quote, have a read and let me know what you think. So a lot of students would love to go and study English overseas, but they just don't have that opportunity. So the next best thing, and Christine Nuttall has a beautiful book written about teaching reading, and I'll show you the cover in a moment, is to get them to read extensively. Honestly, my IELTS students keep on asking me, teacher, how do I get a better bench score? Read. My general English students say, teacher, how do I become a better writer? Read, because reading gives you so much. It improves your first and second language. It improves vocabulary, grammar. And this is really something we need to make not always the students aware of, but at times I believe we need to make the parents aware of. Yeah, so this is something you could maybe take to your teacher meetings to say, this is the best next thing compared to traveling or living in another country. Get them to read. But yes, they might hate reading, Olga, and I'm going to see if I can give you some ideas how we can get them interested in a moment. Yeah. So yeah, get them to read. A really important thing for us to do to get a more positive attitude towards the language in general. However, you've already said to me, there's lots and lots of challenges. They don't like reading. They maybe lack the concentration. I don't know. There might be some other challenges that you have faced when you try to set up extensive reading groups or book groups or book clubs. What sort of other problems and challenges do you experience with your students? Ali, there's lots of fabulous material. Like you have your graded readers. You've got One Stop English, which has articles at different levels. There is a website called Newsella, which also has articles at different levels. And there is ER Central, which is Extensive Reading Central from Rob Waring, and he is really the guru on extensive reading. So you can find all sorts of advice there as well about your different sources. They're worried about long text, they get bored quickly. Newsella with an S, Vanessa. Good, busy students and busy teachers, yes. Good. So very quick summary. I think this summarizes what you were talking about. And Rob Waring, W-A-R-I-N-G, the guru of extensive reading, also talks about that. Time. We do not have enough time in the classroom. And some of our learners, like us teachers, are very busy. They don't have enough time after class. But honestly, there is no excuse not to read for 5 minutes a day when you wait for the bus, when you're in the taxi, or maybe when you're just waiting for the oven to get hot. 5 minutes on your phone should be achievable to start for all of us. Resources, that is probably a larger challenge. What are you going to use? Where do you get it from? Now, we've got the guided readers from Macmillan, of course, but you've also got online resources. I always like One Stop English because they have newspaper articles, which are very good for my intermediate learners who are preparing for IELTS. The Gutenberg project, Maria Jose, indeed, also fabulous. There is also a website, Time Kids, which is all these article-like ideas that you see in the Time magazine for children. So that is about bananas and where they grow, for example. So it's still about the environment, but then at a level that younger learners can cope with. Gutenberg project has all sorts of links, Atifa, to different reading sources as well. Yeah. Now, the next problem, of course, is that your students might be of different levels. So you need to figure out what level they should read at. Then, and this is maybe a bigger problem, there might be a lack of interest at times from your principal at school who doesn't see this as so important because it's not communicative language teaching, it doesn't fit in their vision. Or it might be the parents who don't value that you spend 10 minutes of your class time on reading. And that links often with assessment because a lot of people feel like, oh, you can't assess it or you're not assessing it because that's not the aim of extensive reading, right? It's for pleasure. So there's a lot of things against it that make it harder for us. The other thing, accountability. How do I know that my student really reads? Yeah. So all these things taken together, I think the biggest challenge is, Simona, as well, that the students are maybe just not so interested, and you've got 34 in a classroom. How are you going to make this happen? Yeah. And I think the main problem here, there's two issues. Reading is effortful. It is hard work. It was for us too when we learned how to read. So we need to make it easier. And then it becomes more enjoyable, but also they might not have a reading habit at home. So we really need to try and sell it to our students so that they actually want to give it a go, which is a huge challenge for us teachers. Because reading, as we said before, is needed for their future. It's a key life skill, Patricia. So one of the ways I try to tempt my students is by using audiobooks as well. If they find it hard, they can read and listen at the same time, or they have a reading buddy they can work with together. Yeah. Now, how do I try to get my students, and I'm not saying this is the way to do it, but I experience the same challenges that you have with your learners. How do I get them to join me in this journey? And how do I get them to actually upper their reading miles? And that is the hardest thing. So I've learned one lesson. It's all got to do with emotion and engagement. If the students are not interested, very little is going to go in. It's more like, we're not joining you. Yeah. So to get them engaged, the first thing is really they need to be able to choose their own topics they want to read, possibly with support of an audio book or support of a video or support of a buddy. We need to emotionally engage them. And to be honest, reading is emotional engagement. The first question I asked you, how does reading make you feel? It was all about emotions, right? So I try to sort of trick my students into reading. I'm not going to say you should read because it's good for you. Yeah, it doesn't work. I'm just trying to sort of use this analogy of, reading is a little bit like running. And these two things for me are my key things in life. I love running and I love reading, and it's got a lot of similarities. And I get my students to guess what sort of similarities are there between reading and running. Can you see any similarities between reading and running? So with the pictures, I get them curious and I ask them this question. What do you think the similarities are between reading and running? An ongoing process, little by little. They're both very tiring. They need time. At first, it seems very hard. And you have to go at your own pace. Here you go. So we start a conversation about reading. Not me telling you you should read because it's good for you. Just talking about what could be a similarity and how can we apply this in the classroom. So indeed, they both need practice, but you need to start at the beginning. So you need to really take it step by step. And when you start reading, it's like running. It hurts. There is this little voice in your head saying, oh God, can we stop now, please? Yeah. So they need to develop stamina, concentration, and the discipline to keep going. So when I say step by step, little by little, I start my extensive reading in the classroom, maybe 10 minutes a day. I'm not saying take the book home, start at home. Doesn't work. I'm there to support them. And we start with short texts, maybe from the Gutenberg Project, maybe from Newsella, maybe from curiosity.com, some topic that they have picked themselves. And we start at a simple level for students that need that, more advanced level for the students that need that. And I help them select those texts. And that is really important in the beginning. Short, in class, shorter texts, and help them select. Because if they select the wrong text, they're not going to understand anything. They're not going to enjoy it. You put them off for life. And we all know what it's like when you select a book that you don't understand. It's not fun. It's annoying. Yeah. So we need to really make sure they can understand what they read, so they're enabled to enjoy it. So very important question for us as a teacher is, what is an appropriate text for your learners? Yeah. So when they don't have so much language, first thing first, the topic. They need to give you the topic they're interested in. They're emotionally engaged with fashion. Find something that talks about fashion or movies or whatever that topic is. And then you need to check the vocabulary level so you enable them to enjoy it. Yeah? Have you got any idea what percentage of the words students need to understand in a reading if they should enjoy it? So we want them to be able to enjoy it. I see some beautiful numbers there. Quite high percentages, lovely. So when I started doing my research on reading, which is about 2 years ago, I was super surprised to find this in research. If you want students to read for enjoyment with an understanding rate of about 70 to 80%, they need to understand 90 till 95% of the vocabulary. This is from Nagy and Scott, two researchers in the US. However, Paul Nation, who's from Victoria University in New Zealand, he says, actually, he errs on the side of caution, saying second language learners should probably understand 95 to 98% of the text to make them enjoy it. Shima, isn't that just a super high percentage? So I think what you need to think of when you select a book, it needs to be easier. This is why your graded readers will help you a lot as a teacher. Vocabulary really matters, Martina, and I didn't know this either when I started. So I think I selected books initially in the panic session. They were too hard. You can learn some new vocabulary. That is not the aim of extensive reading. I might have selected some books that were too easy. And if the story is not so interesting and it's too easy, it's not fun either. So we want to find a healthy struggle level for our students, which is a little bit like read one page anywhere in the book and count how many words you don't know. Yeah. If you don't know 5 words on one page, maybe it's too hard. If you know all the words, maybe that book is a little bit too easy. We're really looking for not knowing 2 till 3 words. You can still enjoy and make meaning of the words that you don't know. So most important message for you as a teacher, vocabulary matters. Yeah. So it might not always be authentic material, Elena. It might be way too difficult for them at that stage. The second thing, when I talk about running alone is boring, right? We're social creatures. We like to talk to other people. So why not provide opportunities for your students, Andre, 2 to 3% on a page, which is normally about 100 words. So buddy up with someone else. Give them opportunities to share and work with others. We don't live alone. We don't live alone, we don't walk alone, but we do read alone. And I think this is one of the things my students find the most boring. It's more authentic, but when you do extensive reading, what do you with a book? I go walk up to my neighbor, colleague and say, oh yeah, what are you reading? What is it about? So in an authentic context, I talk about what I'm reading. So a reading buddy, for example, you can share your topics, but also if I'm reading something and I'm not sure, I can actually make meaning. It helps me understand things better when I vocalize my thoughts. I might even be able to ask you, what do you think this means? Yeah, so if they're reading the same book, perfect. If not, get them to share about the character, about the context, about what's happening. Different activities here. I use a lot of reading buddies with lower level, where students might have the same graded reader. They can help each other with pronunciation if that's your aim. If they're at that level, they can help each other summarize what they read yesterday, where they're going to start today. Book talks. People with different books just talk about, what are you reading? Is it interesting? A book fair. I'm trying to sell my reader to you. So I really need to be very critical about my book, but also positive. 3, 2, 1. You might know the activity. You talk about 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. So it's really fluency speaking. Interview me. This is my book. Ask me a question. And ThinkPairShare. I give the class a question. Does it matter any book? Would you recommend a book? Yes or no? Speak for 1 minute to your partner. Think, pair, share. And they speak for 1 minute. A speaks, B listens. B speaks, A listens. And any question, a general question, you can use here. Yeah, so you integrate that in your readers. And when I'm running with my husband or my friends, we check in on each other. Yeah, we're running together. And I talk to my buddy, how you feeling? How are your legs? How's your knee? Are you all right for another K? Do that with your students too. Don't let them read and suffer in silence. We communicate in life, so you can check in when they're reading in class in a really nice way. Yeah, you can help them, like, talk about the book. Are you enjoying the book? Would you recommend it to me? You can even check in by looking at their body language. If they're slouching, looking grumpy, walk over to them and have a little chat. The students that look like they're enjoying it, Adela, you can leave them. They can do their reading, but make sure that you connect with all your students once in a while and have a chat about what they're reading. Show your interest in what they're reading. That, again, is motivating and very authentic. It does mean that you want to do some reading in class. Yeah. And I've also noticed that some of my students do not read without me setting a task. Now, don't want to say follow-up tasks should be assessments, but this is a way for you to monitor again what they're doing, what they like, how they are going in this reading journey. They can select whatever task they want. They can draw a visual story. They can make a one-page gallery where they summarize the highlights. They can compare it to another study. That could be in a reading journal, and they can choose what task they want to do. So I use this a little bit to make sure that I see that they are doing some reading. I was about a 5-minute oral presentation too. Yes, there's lots of different tasks, but at least there is something they do once they have finished the book. It gives me a little bit of accountability to the students because they need to do it. As the same as with running, they need to run their own race. So you are a guide on the site. Initially, you help them selecting the books. Initially, you maybe help them finding topics they like. But in the end, we need to let them run their own race and hand over to the students so they become more independent in this process. And independent, selecting books or magazines or websites, they can check it with you, but graduate, release and hand over. It's very motivating. It's empowering when you can make your own choices about the text, about the topic, about the team. Am I going to do this in pairs or in groups, that task-based activity, and about the tasks they do as well. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to give you all my activities in detail here. I also cannot give you all my resources in detail, but we will write a blog for Macmillan that will be up very soon, in which you can read more about all the activities and the sources I use. But I think for us, we need to really hand over in the text. And how do you want to read? With the sound as well, or want to see on the screen? Do you want to read in the corner? Do you want to read at your desk? Do you want to do the pair work or group work with the task-based activity? And here is my choice board. So they choose which follow-up task they are going to do. Yeah. And the last one, of course, it isn't easy, but the more you read, the better you get at reading as well. And I think that's the most important thing. Do not give up. Because in reading, the more running miles you get, the better the muscle memory, the easier it gets. And that is exactly the same in reading. They are developing automaticity. It means your reading becomes effortless, therefore more enjoyable. So my tips is I cannot give you a magic bullet or a magic pill to make your students read. But I'm trying to entice them by comparing it to running, and really take in mind that we need to take it slow. We need to give them opportunities to work with others, have an informal check with them so you can monitor how they're going and get them to run their own race. But above all, make it a positive learning experience so they want to keep going, because your aim is to make sure that they encounter reading in a positive way and don't want to stop reading. And that's the most important gift I think you can give your students. Yeah. Now, if you're really interested, here are some books that you can maybe look at. That is Christine Nuttall about teaching reading skills. The second one is more about the brain and reading. My favorite book ever, I think. These slides will all be on the website soon. I'll write a blog which is based on this presentation with some links and more information about my activities as well. So for now, we just managed it within the hour. Any questions, let us know. Type them into the chat box, but I hope I've given you some ideas how we can entice our students by making it engaging and empowering them in the process. And I'm going to leave you with one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Seuss. Yeah, the more you read, the more things you will know. The more that you learn, the more places you will go. Thank you so much for your active participation, and see you online next time, I hope.